They say the Emperor protects. I believed this once, even as the sky turned to fire and the oceans boiled away beneath cyclonic bombardment. Now I know the truth. The Emperor does not protect worlds. He burns them. My name is Kastor Venn, and I am the thing that survived when Typhon Primaris died. I watched my world become ash, my family turn to vapor, and 8 billion souls scream their last prayers to a god who answered with annihilation. This is not a story of survival. It is a confession of what remains when everything human has been incinerated, and only duty to the dead persists. The wheat fields of Typhon Primaris stretch to the horizon in waves of gold and amber, rippling beneath twin suns that never seem too harsh, never too gentle. Perfect. Engineered over millennia to feed 17 neighboring systems in the eastern fringe. I remember standing at the observation deck of the Administratum Tower in Hive Tertius, watching harvester servitors move through the grain like metal insects, their collection hoppers gleaming in the afternoon light. My name was Kastor Venn then. Not just Kastor, not just the survivor. I was grain tithe administrator, 3rd class, in service to the Departamento Munitorum. I calculated yields and shipping schedules. I ensured that the God Emperor's servants across the sector received their daily sustenance. Mundane work, perhaps, but necessary. Honorable in its small way. I had a wife, Mira. Her hair caught the light like the wheat fields themselves, golden and warm. She worked in the textile manufactorum, supervising the production of uniforms for the Astra Militarum regiments that defended our subsector. We had been married for 11 years. I can still remember the exact texture of her hand in mine, the calluses from the loom controls, the way her fingers would interlock with my own. We had a daughter, Ellen, 7 years old. She attended the Skolum 3 blocks from our habitation unit, learning the Imperial Creed and basic mathematics. Her favorite color was blue. Not the blue of the sky, she would insist, but the deep blue of the ocean at night. Typhon Primaris had 2 small seas, both reserved for atmospheric processing and prohibited to civilians. But she had seen pictures in her data slate, and she dreamed of water. Our habitation unit was modest, 14 meters square, on the 73rd floor of residential stack Gamma. We had a window that faced east, allowing us to watch the primary sun rise each morning. Mira would make recaf, the bitter aroma filling our small space. Ellen would complain about her lessons. I would review the day's tithe projections on my data slate. Normal, beautifully. Typhon Primaris was not a wealthy world, but neither was it poor. The tithes were manageable. The ecclesiarchy presence was strong but not oppressive. The Arbites maintained order without excessive brutality. Crime was low, productivity was high. The planetary governor, Lord Kastor Venn, had served for 32 years and was widely considered competent if unimaginative. We paid our taxes. We attended devotions. We served the Imperium. I loved my world with the unconscious affection one has for air or gravity. It simply was, eternal and unchanging in my limited perception. I knew intellectually that the Imperium faced threats. The Skolum had taught me of the Xenos horrors beyond our borders, the heretic and the mutant, the demon and the traitor. But these were distant abstractions, problems for the Astra Militarum and the Emperor's Angels of Death to solve, not concerns for a grain tithe administrator living 73 floors above the surface in a world that had known peace for 6 generations. The first signs were subtle enough to ignore. 3 months before the end, a refugee ship arrived in system carrying survivors from the neighboring world of Drekla. They spoke of uprisings, of coordinated attacks against Imperial infrastructure. The PDF had suppressed the revolts, they said, but with difficulty. The refugees were processed through the standard immigration facilities and dispersed throughout Typhon's hive cities. I remember filing the paperwork to adjust our grain tithe projections upward to account for the additional 30,000 mouths to feed. A minor inconvenience. Nothing more. 2 months before the end, PDF patrols in the underhive increased. I noticed because the reports crossed my desk. Grain shipments to underhive distribution centers were being delayed by security checkpoints. Efficiency decreased by 0.7%. I filed a complaint with the appropriate authorities. It was acknowledged, but not addressed. 1 month before the end, 3 administratum officials in my department failed to report for duty. Not unusual. Illness, family emergencies. These things happened, but they were replaced within hours by new personnel I did not recognize. Their credentials were in order. Their work was adequate, yet they seemed unfamiliar with the standard procedures, asking questions that veterans should not need to ask. 20 days before the end, I noticed my colleague Harvin staring at me during morning briefing. Not the casual glance of a bored functionary, but an intense, evaluating stare. When I met his eyes, he smiled. Too wide. Too many teeth visible. He had worked 3 desks away from me for 8 years. We had shared recaf breaks, complained about tithe quotas, discussed our families. I had attended his daughter's naming ceremony. But in that moment, he felt like a stranger, wearing Harvin's face. 10 days before the end, orbital traffic increased dramatically. Naval vessels, their hulls massive and ancient, took up positions around Typhon Primaris. The official explanation was routine fleet exercises. The unofficial whispers in the administratum suggested heightened security concerns. I did not ask questions. In the Imperium, curiosity about military matters is often rewarded with unpleasant attention from the authorities. 5 days before the end, Mira came home from the manufactorum pale and shaken. She had seen something in the lower levels, she said. Workers with unusual features. Deformities, perhaps, or mutations. But when she reported it to her supervisor, she was told firmly to mind her work and forget what she had seen. The matter was being handled by appropriate authorities. I held her that night as she trembled, telling her that the Arbites would investigate, that the Emperor protected the faithful, that we were safe in our devotion and service. Emperor, help me! I believed every word. 3 days before the end, Ellen asked me why the man at the market had extra arms. I told her she had imagined it, that the shadows in the lower levels played tricks on the eyes. She insisted. 4 arms, she said. 2 where they should be, and 2 smaller ones beneath, folded against his chest. I told her to say her prayers and not to speak of such things. I reported nothing. I wanted to believe it was childhood imagination rather than confront what it might mean. The day before the end, I stood at my observation deck and watched the wheat fields ripple in the wind. The harvest was 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Our tithe would exceed projections by 4%. I had already filed the commendation requests for the agri-servitor maintenance teams. Everything was proceeding according to the Emperor's design. That night, Mira, Ellen, and I attended evening devotions at the local chapel. The preacher spoke of vigilance against corruption, of the insidious nature of the Xenos taint, of the necessity of reporting unusual behavior to the proper authorities. His words seemed more urgent than usual, his gestures more forceful. Several Arbites stood at the chapel exits, watching the congregation with undisguised scrutiny. We walked home through streets that felt subtly wrong. Fewer people, more patrols, servitors cleaning graffiti from walls before I could read what had been written. The air itself felt charged with anticipation, like the moments before a storm breaks. I put Ellen to bed, reading her the approved tales of Saint Celestine's martyrdom. She asked me if angels were real. I told her yes, that the Emperor's angels of death protected humanity from horrors beyond comprehension. She asked if they would protect us. I said, of course, that we were faithful servants of the Imperium. that no harm would come to those who served with pure hearts. I kissed her forehead. Her skin was warm, soft, alive. I told her I loved her. She told me she loved me too, and that she wanted to see the ocean someday. I promised we would go when she was older, knowing even then it was a promise the administratum would likely never permit me to fulfill. Travel between worlds required authorization, but the lie comforted her. That was the last normal night of my life. The last night, I was simply Kastor Venn, husband and father, minor functionary in an imperium so vast my world was barely a rounding error in its calculations. The last night I could believe the Emperor protected. Tomorrow, I would learn what protection truly meant in the grim darkness of the far future. The sirens woke us at 4:17 in the morning. Not the standard shift change alert that marked the beginning of each work cycle, but the emergency klaxon reserved for critical threats to hive integrity. The sound cut through our habitation unit like a blade, shrill and unrelenting. I stumbled from bed, my mind still foggy with sleep. Mira was already at the window, looking down at the streets 73 floors below. Even at this distance, I could see the emergency lights strobing red and white, illuminating crowds moving through the thoroughfares in patterns that seemed wrong. Not the orderly flow of citizens responding to directives, but chaotic surges that suggested panic or purpose beyond legitimate authority. The Voxcaster mounted on our wall activated automatically, the planetary governor's voice filling our small space with forced calm. Citizens of Typhon Primaris, remain in your habitation units. This is not a drill. Insurrectionist elements have initiated coordinated attacks against Imperial infrastructure across multiple hive cities. The Planetary Defense Force is responding. Do not leave your homes. The Emperor protects the faithful. Ellen appeared in the doorway of her sleeping alcove, clutching the stuffed grox I had given her for her 5th birthday. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the emergency lights from the window. Papa, what is happening? I did not know how to answer. Insurrection on Typhon Primaris was incomprehensible. We had no separatist movements, no significant population of malcontents. Our tithes were fair, our governance stable. What could possibly motivate rebellion? The Voxcaster continued, providing updates in clipped military terminology. Attacks on the Administratum complex in Hive Primus, PDF garrison overrun in Hive Secundus. Communications disrupted in 7 of 12 major population centers. Mira pulled Ellen close, her face pale in the flickering light. Kastor, what do we do? Before I could respond, the explosions began. Distant at first, deep rumbling thuds that I felt in my chest more than heard. Then closer, much closer. The building shook, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Through the window, I watched a fireball rise from somewhere in the mid-levels, perhaps 20 floors below our position. The Voxcaster shrieked with static, then cut out entirely. Emergency lighting activated throughout our unit, bathing everything in sickly yellow. I moved to the door, pressing my ear against the metal. Sounds from the corridor outside. Running footsteps. Shouting. A scream that ended abruptly. Stay away from the door, I told Mira, moving back to join them near the window. We wait for official instructions. The instructions never came. Instead, the building's internal Vox system crackled to life with a voice I did not recognize. Brothers and sisters of the true faith, the day of ascension is upon us. The star children call us to rise, join us in the depths, or be consumed with the false emperor's dying light. The words made no sense. Star children, true faith. This was not the rhetoric of political insurrection. This was something else entirely. The next hour passed in fragments. Distant sounds of combat. Lasfire and autogun reports echoing through the hive's structure. More explosions. The acrid smell of smoke seeping through our ventilation system. I barricaded our door with furniture. knowing it would provide minimal actual protection, but needing to feel like I was doing something to keep my family safe. At 6:30, the Voxcaster reactivated with a new voice. Clipped, military, authority wrapped in cold efficiency. This is Commander Vorsek of the 73rd Typhon PDF Regiment. The situation is evolving. What we face is not conventional insurrection, but widespread cult activity of Xenos origin. Repeat, Xenos, cult, infiltration. All civilians are ordered to proceed to designated safe zones immediately. Follow PDF instructions without deviation. Anyone displaying unusual physical characteristics or behaving suspiciously will be detained for screening. The Emperor protects the vigilant. Xenos cult. The words settled in my stomach like ice. I had read the warnings in Imperial literature, the cautionary tales of how alien infiltration could corrupt entire populations without detection. Genestealer cults, they were called. Xenos parasites that infected human hosts, creating hybrid offspring that appeared almost human while serving an alien intelligence. I thought of Harvin's too wide smile, of the workers Mira had seen with deformities, of Ellen's man with 4 arms. Not imagination, not mutation, infection. How many? How deep did this corruption run? We gathered what we could. Emergency rations, water reclamation tablets, identification documents. I retrieved the small autogun I kept sealed in the back of our storage locker, a relic from my brief service in the local militia before I entered administratum training. 15 rounds. Against a Xenos cult, it might as well be a pointed stick, but holding it steadied my hands. The corridors outside our habitation unit were chaos. Hundreds of residents streaming toward the evacuation routes, clutching children and possessions. PDF troopers in flak armor stood at intersections, directing the flow with barked commands and lasguns held ready. Some of the troopers looked barely older than Ellen. Conscripts, likely, pulled from the scolums and given a week of training before being thrust into this nightmare. We descended through the emergency stairwells, the crowds pressing close in the narrow space. 73 floors became an eternity. The air grew thicker with each level, heavy with fierce sweat and recycled breath. Somewhere below us, someone was crying. Somewhere above, I heard gunfire. On the 42nd floor landing, we encountered our first body, a woman I recognized from my morning commute, her throat torn open by something with claws. Her eyes stared at nothing, blood pooling beneath her in a spreading dark mirror. PDF troopers stepped over her without pause, shouting at us to keep moving. Ellen buried her face in Mira's shoulder, and I was grateful she could not see what I saw, what I would never be able to unsee. The safe zone was established in Tertius Square, a massive open area at the hive's base, normally used for public gatherings and devotions. Now it teemed with tens of thousands of refugees, corralled behind hastily erected barricades of razor wire and sandbags. PDF troopers and Arbites maintained a perimeter, their weapons trained outward toward the hive exits. We were processed through screening checkpoints. Physical examination for any signs of mutation or Xenos taint. Questions about unusual contacts or behaviors. The examiner, a haggard-looking medicae, inspected Mira and Ellen with clinical detachment before waving them through. When she examined me, her eyes lingered on a birthmark on my shoulder, and for one terrible moment I thought she would declare me contaminated. But she simply marked my documentation and gestured me onward. The square had been divided into sectors, each supervised by PDF personnel. We were assigned to Sector 7, a rectangle of pavement approximately 30 meters square, already packed with perhaps 200 other refugees. No shelter, no privacy, just bodies pressed together, waiting for instructions that might never come. I found a spot near the edge of our sector where we could at least put our backs against a wall. Mira held Ellen close. murmuring reassurances that sounded hollow even to my ears. I scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. I found several, colleagues from the administratum, neighbors from our residential stack, all wearing the same expression of disbelieving shock. And I found others, people I thought I knew, revealed now as strangers. The merchant from the market where Mira bought our weekly rations, being dragged away by Arbites while he shrieked about the four-armed emperor. A woman I recognized from Ellen's scolum, her clothing torn open to reveal a chitinous ridge running down her spine. A PDF trooper removing his helmet to reveal eyes that had migrated too far to the sides of his skull, pulling a grenade from his webbing before 3 last rounds burned through his chest. The cult was everywhere, hidden in plain sight for months, perhaps years. All infected, all waiting for some signal to rise simultaneously and tear down imperial authority from within. By midday, the sounds of battle had intensified. Not just small arms fire now, but the deeper crump of artillery and the distinctive crack of las cannons. Through the hive exits, I could see smoke rising from multiple directions. Black columns reaching toward a sky that seemed to be darkening despite the hour. A PDF officer climbed atop a cargo container to address our sector, his augmented voice carrying over the crowd. Citizens, additional forces are en route from the subsector capital. The Astra Militarum will restore order. Remain calm, remain faithful. But his words rang false. I had worked in the administratum long enough to understand logistics. The nearest Imperial Guard regiments were weeks away at minimum. Whatever was happening on Typhon Primaris would be resolved long before reinforcements could arrive, one way or another. Night fell, and with it came true horror. The perimeter was breached in 3 locations, simultaneously. Not by conventional assault, but by things that erupted from the underhive, moving with alien speed and purpose. Pure strains, someone screamed. The true form of the Genestealer. I saw them only briefly in the stuttering light of Las Fire. 4-armed nightmares, their bodies covered in chitinous purple-blue armor that seemed to drink in light. Their heads were elongated and eyeless, mouths filled with concentric rings of teeth. They moved like striking serpents, covering impossible distances in single bounds, their claws rending through flak armor and flesh with equal ease. The PDF line collapsed in minutes. Troopers died screaming, torn apart by creatures that seemed impossible, that violated every understanding of what should be able to exist in a sane universe. I fired my autogun at something moving in the darkness, felt the weapon kick against my shoulder, had no idea if I hit anything or merely wasted ammunition on shadows. Mira pulled Ellen down behind a plasteel barrier as Las Fire streaked overhead. I crouched beside them, heart hammering, waiting for death to find us in the chaos. Around us, thousands of refugees surged in panic, trampling the weak and slow in their desperation to escape. Then, cutting through the screams and gunfire, a new sound, the distinctive scream of drop pods entering atmosphere. I looked up to see fire streaking across the darkened sky, dozens of burning stars falling toward Typhon Primaris with divine purpose. The Space Marines had arrived, the Emperor's angels of death, responding to the planetary distress calls. Hope flared in my chest, irrational and desperate. They would save us. They would purge this corruption and restore order. The Adeptus Astartes never failed. The drop pods impacted in the square and across the surrounding districts with earth-shaking force. Assault ramps blew outward, and from within emerged warriors that made even the pure-strain Genestealers seem small by comparison. Ceramite armor in the blue of Ultramar, adorned with the honors of 1,000 campaigns. Bolt pistols and chain swords crackling with power. Transhuman might given form and purpose. What followed was not battle, but extermination. The Space Marines advanced through the square with methodical precision, their bolters barking controlled bursts that reduced Genestealers to pulped meat and shattered chitin. Where cultists had terrorized PDF troopers, they died in droves before warriors who moved with impossible speed and struck with devastating force. I watched an ultramarine captain, his armor decorated with purity seals and campaign badges, engage 3 pure strains simultaneously. His power sword carved through alien flesh with contemptuous ease, each strike measured and efficient. He killed with the same clinical detachment I had once applied to tithe calculations. The square was reclaimed in less than 20 minutes. The surviving PDF and Arbites rallied behind the Space Marines, their morale restored by the presence of humanity's finest warriors. Bodies were collected and burned, Xenos and cultist alike. The perimeter was re-established, this time with proper fortifications and overlapping fields of fire. We were saved. Temporarily, locally, but the sounds of battle echoing from other parts of the hive told a different story. This was merely one small victory in what was becoming a planetary war. Over the following days, more Space Marines arrived. A full company of Ultramarines, their strike cruiser visible in orbit like a second moon. They prosecuted the war against the cult with remorseless efficiency. But even I could see the mathematics turning against them. The cult had infected too deeply, spread too widely. For every cultist killed, 3 more emerged from hiding. For every pure strain destroyed, 2 more appeared from the underhive depths. I learned to recognize the different generations of cult hybrids. The first and second generation, barely human, with pronounced alien features. Third generation, who could pass as human at casual inspection. Fourth generation, who appeared entirely human and served as the cult's infiltrators in imperial society. How many of my colleagues had been fourth generation? How many people I had worked beside for years, shared recaf with, trusted, had been waiting for the signal to rise and slaughter me? 10 days after the rising began, I stood in what remained of Tertius Square and watched Ultramarines conferring with inquisitorial agents who had arrived in system. Their body language suggested disagreement, tension. The Space Marines gestured to tactical displays showing cleared sectors and purge progress. The Inquisitors shook their heads, pointing to different data that I could not see but could imagine. Infection rates, estimated cult population, projected casualties if the war continued. That night, Mira asked me what I thought would happen. I held her and Ellen close in our tiny corner of the refugee sector and told her that the Emperor would provide, that we had only to remain faithful and obedient. I did not tell her what I had overheard 2 PDF officers discussing when they thought no one was listening. I did not tell her about the inquisitorial assessor who had been seen taking samples of fallen Space Marines, examining them for any sign of genostellar infection. I did not tell her about the fleet assets that had begun assembling in high orbit, their weapons charging for purposes that had nothing to do with fighting cultists on the ground. I did not tell her that I thought we were already dead, that we simply had not received the official notification yet. The Inquisitor arrived on the 13th day after the rising began. I did not see him at first, but I felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. The Ultramarines who had been coordinating the defense suddenly deferred to someone else, their posture shifting from command to consultation. The PDF officers stopped issuing orders and began receiving them. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. Inquisitor Lord Voke of the Ordo Xenos. I learned his name later, read it in the official records that somehow survived the burning. But in that moment, he was simply a figure in black carapace armor trimmed with gold and crimson, moving through the refugee sectors with a retinue of stormtroopers and servo skulls that hovered around him like mechanical cherubs. He did not speak to the refugees. We were beneath his notice, data points rather than people. Instead, he spent 3 days examining everything, interrogating captured cultists in makeshift detention facilities, reviewing casualty reports and infection projections, consulting with the Ultramarines captain and Adeptus Mechanicus biology specialists who had arrived to study the genestealer genetic material. I watched from a distance as he stood on the platform erected in the center of Tertius Square, surrounded by picked screens displaying tactical data I could not decipher. He was perfectly still for long periods, his augmented eyes processing information at speeds beyond human capability. Sometimes his fingers would move, manipulating hololithic displays that showed the hive cities in 3 dimensions, entire sectors marked in red that seemed to spread like blood in water. On the 3rd day of his assessment, the voxcasters throughout the refugee sectors activated simultaneously. Every screen, every audio channel, every data slate capable of receiving transmissions. The Inquisitor's face appeared, filling my view with features that seemed carved from iron and contempt. Citizens of Typhon Primaris. His voice was cultured, educated, utterly devoid of warmth. I am Inquisitor Lord Hadrian Voke of the Ordo Xenos, granted authority by the God Emperor himself to assess and respond to alien threats within this subsector. I have completed my evaluation of your world. Silence fell across the square. Tens of thousands of refugees stopped their movement, their conversations, their prayers. We all knew that whatever came next would determine our fates. The gene-stealer cult infestation on Typhon Primaris has achieved critical penetration of the planetary population. Current estimates indicate 43% of the total population across all hive cities has been compromised by Xenos genetic corruption, either through direct infection or through birth from infected progenitors. 43%. The number struck me like a physical blow, nearly half our world. Billions of people, all corrupted, all serving an alien intelligence that had wormed its way into our society over generations. The Adeptus Astartes have prosecuted this war with their characteristic excellence. Vogue continued, his expression unchanging. They have reclaimed 17% of infected territory and eliminated an estimated 700,000 cultists and hybrid organisms. This represents exemplary service to the Imperium. A pause. In that silence, I heard my own heartbeat, loud and desperate. However, the word fell like a guillotine blade. The cult's genetic material has been detected in the gene seed of 2 fallen ultramarines recovered from the battlefield. The Xenos corruption is capable of penetrating even the Emperor's finest warriors. To continue ground operations risks the integrity of the Adeptus Astartes themselves, an unacceptable strategic cost. I felt Mira's hand find mine, her fingers cold despite the humid air. Around us, other refugees began to understand what was being said, what it meant. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, rising in volume until a PDF officer barked for silence. Furthermore, Vogue said, the cult has achieved such thorough infiltration that conventional purge operations would require decades of screening, quarantine, and selective elimination. The resources necessary to save this world exceed its strategic value to the Imperium. Typhon Primaris produces agricultural products that can be replaced by increased tithes from neighboring systems. The population is replaceable through standard colonization procedures. Replaceable. 8 billion human souls. And we were merely replaceable components in the Imperium's vast machinery. Therefore, in accordance with the authority granted to me by the High Lords of Terra, and in service to the God Emperor's protection of humanity, I declare Typhon Primaris perdita, lost, beyond salvation through conventional means. The murmurs became shouts, screams, denials. PDF troopers moved to contain the surging crowd, but even they seemed uncertain, looking to their officers for confirmation that this was actually happening. Vogue's image did not waver. Exterminatus protocols are hereby authorized. Cyclonic torpedoes will be deployed to achieve atmospheric ignition and total sterilization of the planetary surface. This is not punishment but necessity. The Xenos corruption must be burned from existence to prevent its spread to neighboring systems. Exterminatus. The word existed in imperial literature as the ultimate sanction, reserved for worlds so corrupted that nothing could redeem them. Virus bombs that reduced populations to organic sludge. atmospheric incinerators that turned skies to fire, cyclonic torpedoes that shattered continents and boiled oceans, the complete annihilation of a world and everything on it. A 72-hour evacuation window will be provided for essential Imperial personnel, Voke continued. Adeptus Astartes assets will withdraw to orbit immediately. Administratum officials classified as critical to subsector operations will be transported to designated relocation facilities. Ecclesiarchy personnel of sufficient rank will be evacuated. PDF command staff will be screened and relocated based on assessment results. I listened to him enumerate the categories of people who would be saved. Tech priests, maintaining critical infrastructure, senior arbites, high-ranking nobles whose bloodlines warranted preservation, perhaps 10,000 individuals total, extracted from a population of 8 billion. All other citizens are commended to the Emperor's mercy. Your sacrifice prevents the spread of Xenos corruption to other worlds. Your deaths serve the Imperium. The Emperor protects. The transmission ended. The screens went dark. For a moment, absolute silence reigned in Tertius Square as 8 billion death sentences settled into comprehension. Then, chaos erupted. Screaming, weeping. Prayers shouted to a god who had just condemned an entire world. Some refugees surged toward the PDF lines, begging for evacuation, for screening, for any chance at survival. Others collapsed where they stood, their minds unable to process the magnitude of what had been declared. Still, others turned on each other, old grudges and suspicions finding violent outlet in the face of annihilation. I stood frozen. Mira and Ellen pressed against me, my mind trying to grasp what had just been pronounced. 72 hours. 3 days until the sky would burn and everything I had ever known would cease to exist. "Papa!" Ellen's voice was small, frightened, seeking reassurance I could not provide. "What does it mean? How do you explain to a 7-year-old child that her entire world has been sentenced to death? That the Emperor she had been taught to worship had deemed her life, her mother's life, her father's life, and 8 billion others expendable? That we had 3 days left before fire would consume everything? It means we need to stay together," I managed, my voice sounding distant and hollow. "No matter what happens, we stay together." Around us, PDF officers were attempting to restore order, but their hearts were not in it. They had just learned that they too had been condemned unless they fell into the narrow categories deemed worthy of evacuation. Some abandoned their posts immediately, running toward the spaceport districts in futile hope of securing passage off-world. Others remained at their stations, duty binding them even in the face of annihilation. The Voxcasters activated again, this time with more practical information. Evacuation ships would depart from the primary spaceport in Hive Primus. Only individuals with verified credentials would be permitted to board. Atmospheric defenses would engage any unauthorized craft attempting to leave the planet. Martial law was in effect. Looting would be punished by summary execution, as if execution mattered when the entire world would burn in 72 hours. I made a decision then. Standing in that square with my family pressed against me and the sounds of despair echoing from every direction. I would not spend our last days fighting for an evacuation slot I had no chance of securing. I was not essential personnel. I was a mid-level grain tithe administrator, forgotten the moment I died. But I could choose how I died, where I died, and with whom. "We are going home," I told Mira. "Back to our habitation unit. We will spend whatever time remains together, as a family." She looked at me with eyes that held both fear and gratitude. She understood. There was no hope of evacuation, no miraculous salvation waiting. We could die in this square, crushed in the panic and chaos, or we could die in our home, with what dignity and peace we could salvage. The journey back through the hive was a descent into madness, The pretense of order had shattered completely. Cultists emerged from hiding, no longer concerned with concealment when death was guaranteed regardless. They preached in the streets about the Star Children, about the four-armed emperor who would deliver them from the false god's judgment. Some refugees listened, converting in their final hours, seeking any comfort in the face of oblivion. Others turned to violence. I witnessed murders over food, over water, over perceived slights that would not matter in 3 days. I saw an Arbeitsjudge attempting to maintain law, reading sentences to criminals who laughed because what was prison when the world would burn. I saw a preacher standing on a cargo container, screaming that this was punishment for insufficient faith, that the righteous would be saved if only they prayed hard enough. No one was saved. The righteous and the corrupt would burn together. We climbed the emergency stairwells of our residential stack, passing bodies at every landing. Some were victims of violence. Others had taken their own lives, choosing the method and moment of their death, rather than waiting for fire from the sky. I covered Ellen's eyes when I could, but there was too much horror to shield her from entirely. Our habitation unit was untouched, exactly as we had left it 13 days earlier when the sirens first woke us. The recaf maker still held the grounds from our last morning. Ellen's schoolwork data slate sat on the table where she had left it. Everything preserved in amber, a moment frozen before the world ended. Mira immediately began organizing, her mind seeking purpose in action. She prepared food from our emergency rations. She cleaned, scrubbing surfaces that would be vaporized in less than 72 hours. I did not stop her. We all sought comfort in familiar routines when the universe became incomprehensible. I stood at our window, looking out over Hive Tertius. Fires burned in dozens of locations. I could see crowds surging through the streets below, their purposes unknowable from this height. In the distance, the spaceport was illuminated by the engines of departing ships, each one carrying a few hundred souls to safety, while billions remained to burn. The fleet in orbit was visible even in daylight, more ships arriving hourly. Massive capital vessels taking up positions around Typhon Primaris in precise geometric patterns. I knew what they carried. Cyclonic torpedoes. Weapons designed for one purpose: the complete annihilation of planetary biospheres. Ellen joined me at the window, her small hand slipping into mine. "Can we really not leave, Papa?" "No, sweetheart, we cannot." "Is it because of the bad people? The ones with extra arms?" "Yes. The bad people spread too much, like a sickness, and the Emperor's doctors have decided the only way to stop the sickness is to burn everything." She was quiet for a long moment, processing this with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Will it hurt?" The question broke something in me. I knelt down to her level, holding her small shoulders, looking into eyes that should have had decades ahead of them, a lifetime of experiences and growth and joy. "I do not know," I told her honestly. "But we will be together, all three of us, and that matters." She nodded, accepting this with the faith children have in their parents, the belief that we can protect them even when we cannot. That night, we slept together in the main room, Ellen between Mira and me. We did not speak much. What was there to say? We had 3 days remaining. 72 hours before the sky would burn and Typhon Primaris would join the countless other worlds the Imperium had sacrificed in its 10,000-year war for survival. I lay awake long after Mira and Ellen's breathing had steadied into sleep, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the Inquisitor's words. Strategic value, acceptable cost, replaceable population. The cold mathematics that governed the Imperium, where individual lives meant nothing against the calculus of species survival. Was he wrong? Could the Imperium have saved Typhon Primaris without risking the spread of genestealer corruption? I did not know. I was not a strategic thinker, not trained in the assessment of galactic-scale threats. But I knew that somewhere in the chain of decisions that led to this moment, 8 billion people had been reduced to numbers on a data slate, weighed and found wanting. The Emperor protects, the creed proclaimed. But protection, I was learning, came in forms both merciful and terrible. Sometimes protection meant salvation. Sometimes it meant annihilation. And the difference depended entirely on which side of the Inquisitor's calculus you fell. The first day after the declaration passed in a strange liminal state, Mira, Ellen, and I existed in our habitation unit as if suspended outside normal time, going through the motions of living while knowing that life itself had an expiration approaching with mathematical certainty. We ate meals because bodies required food. We performed ablutions because habit demanded it. We spoke in quiet voices about nothing of consequence because the only thing worth discussing was too terrible to voice. I attempted to maintain normalcy for Ellen's sake. I helped her with the lessons on her data slate, knowing she would never need the mathematics or imperial history they contained. Mira prepared recaf each morning, the ritual unchanged despite its futility. We were all performing a play for an audience of ourselves, pretending that routine could protect us from what approached. The Voxcasters provided updates throughout the day. Evacuation transports had departed with the first wave of essential personnel. The Ultramarines had withdrawn to their strike cruiser in orbit, their duty on the surface complete. Inquisitor Lord Voke had transmitted final screening protocols for PDF command staff seeking evacuation authorization. The fleet was in position. Cyclonic torpedoes were loaded and blessed by attending ecclesiarchy priests. 56 hours remaining. I stood at our window and watched the hive below descend further into chaos. Fires burned unchecked now. Entire residential stacks consumed by flames, while firefighting servitors remained in their stations. Their simple programming unable to adapt to a world ending. Crowds surged through the streets in patterns that suggested both purpose and randomness, humanity reduced to its base components when stripped of hope. Some sought transcendence. The cult members emerged fully now, no longer hiding their deformities and alien features. They congregated in public squares, preaching about the coming of the Star Children, about ascension through the four-armed Emperor. They promised salvation through transformation, offering genetic corruption as deliverance from the flames. Some desperate refugees accepted, willingly subjecting themselves to the Genestealer's kiss in their final hours, choosing alien death over imperial annihilation. Others sought oblivion through chemical means. The narcotic dens that had operated in secrecy throughout the Underhive now functioned openly, distributing obscura and other prohibited substances without concern for law or consequence. I watched from my window as lines formed outside these establishments, citizens choosing to die in drugged euphoria rather than conscious awareness. Still, others turned to violence. Grudges held for years erupted into murder. Property crimes became meaningless when ownership would end in hours. I witnessed executions in the streets, bodies left where they fell because who would collect them? I saw gangs roaming through residential levels, taking what they wanted because the Arbites had abandoned their posts to seek evacuation or spend final hours with their own families. And some, like us, simply waited, remained in their homes, surrounded by the small comforts of familiar spaces. I could see them through other windows in nearby stacks, families pressed together, individuals sitting in silent contemplation. We were not alone in our choice to die with dignity rather than descend into the madness below. 48 hours remaining. Mira asked me if I thought the Emperor would accept our souls. If dying in Exterminatus constituted martyrdom or merely unfortunate necessity, I had no answer. The ecclesiarchy taught that the faithful returned to the Emperor upon death, their souls joining him on the golden throne. But did that apply when the Emperor himself, through his inquisitorial representatives, had ordered our deaths? "We have served faithfully," I told her, believing it even as doubt gnawed at me. "We paid our tithes, we attended devotions, we raised our daughter in the imperial creed. If that is not enough, Then the Emperor's judgment is beyond my comprehension. She nodded, seeking comfort in the certainty I projected while feeling none myself. That evening, we received an unexpected Vox transmission. Not from official Imperial sources, but from the residential stack's internal communications system. A neighbor, Greven from 3 floors down, had organized a gathering in the communal chapel on the 50th floor. Anyone who wished to spend their final hours in prayer and fellowship was welcome. Mira wanted to go. I saw it in her eyes, the desire for human connection in our last moments. I agreed, though the thought of leaving our sanctuary filled me with dread. We gathered what small valuables we possessed, photographs and mementos, and made our way down through the emergency stairwells. The chapel was filled beyond capacity. Perhaps 200 residents packed into a space designed for 70, but no one complained about the crowding. We pressed together, drawing comfort from proximity, from the reminder that we died as a community rather than isolated individuals. Greven led prayers. He was not ordained clergy, merely a lay preacher who conducted weekly devotions, but his words carried weight in our final hours. He spoke of the Emperor's sacrifice, of his eternal vigil on the Golden Throne. He reminded us that our deaths served the Imperium, preventing the spread of Xenos corruption that might claim other worlds. We died so that humanity might endure. Some found solace in his words. Others wept. I held Ellen on my lap, her small body warm and alive, and wondered if the Emperor truly cared about our individual sacrifices or if we were merely statistical abstractions in the vast calculus of galactic survival. After the prayers, people began sharing memories, not of the recent horror but of their lives before. Childhood recollections, first loves, achievements in their professions, the births of children, the texture of normal life. Mundane and precious in retrospect. An old woman named Cetra spoke of her wedding 63 years earlier, her voice trembling with emotion as she described her husband who had died decades ago. "I will see him again," she said. "Beyond this, in the Emperor's light." A young man, barely into adulthood, confessed that he had never told his parents he loved them before they died in the cult uprising. The admission broke him, and strangers embraced him, offering forgiveness he sought but could not grant himself. Mira spoke of Ellen, of the joy her daughter had brought into her life, of the future she had imagined for her. "She would have done great things," Mira said, tears streaming down her face. "She was so bright, so curious. The Imperium is losing more than it knows." I could not speak. The words lodged in my throat, too heavy with grief to voice. I simply held my family and listened to others transform their lives into stories, preserving themselves in memory, if nowhere else. We returned to our habitation unit near midnight. 36 hours remaining. The second day began with silence. The Voxcasters had ceased their updates. Perhaps there was nothing left to report. The evacuation ships had departed. The fleet was in position. The Exterminatus would proceed on schedule, regardless of what occurred on the surface. Our deaths had been scheduled and required no further announcement. I spent the morning attempting to record messages for no one. I activated my personal data slate and tried to compose something meaningful, some testament to our existence that might somehow survive the burning. But what could I say? That we had lived, that we had loved, that we had served the Imperium faithfully and been rewarded with annihilation. The words would not come. I deleted each attempt, finally abandoning the effort entirely. We would leave no trace. Typhon Primaris would be scrubbed from existence, and with it, every memory, every record, every proof that 8 billion souls had once called this world home. Mira prepared our final meal with what remained in our storage. Real food, not emergency rations. She had saved it for some special occasion that would never come. But this qualified. Our last supper together as a family. We ate slowly, savoring each bite, not for the flavor but for the simple act of sharing sustenance together. Ellen asked if we could play games afterward, the request so normal and childlike that it broke my heart. We played. Simple things from her data slate, educational games about imperial history and mathematics. She laughed when she won. The sound so pure, it seemed to defy the approaching horror. 24 hours remaining. That night, I could not sleep. I stood at our window, watching the fleet in orbit. They were so clearly visible now, arranged in perfect geometric patterns around Typhon Primaris. I counted them obsessively. 14 capital ships, 37 escort vessels, the ultramarine strike cruiser, the inquisitorial flagship, all waiting with the patience of the inevitable. Mira joined me, slipping her hand into mine. We stood together in silence, watching our doom circling overhead like mechanical vultures. "Do you think it will be quick?" she asked. "I hope so. I am afraid," she admitted. "I know. I am too." We held each other as the hours passed, alternating between numb acceptance and surges of desperate terror. This was real. This was happening. In hours, we would cease to exist. Our atoms scattered across a burning wasteland that had once been a world. 12 hours remaining. The sun rose on our final day, illuminating a world already dead, simply waiting for the execution to be carried out. I woke Ellen gently, holding her close as she emerged from sleep into the reality of our last hours. "Is it today, Papa?" "Yes, sweetheart." She nodded, accepting this with the faith children have that their parents tell them truth, even when that truth is unbearable. We dressed in our finest clothes. Mira wore the dress she had married me in, preserved carefully for 11 years. I wore my administratum formal attire. We dressed Ellen in the white devotional gown she had received for her first ecclesiarchy ceremony. If we were to die, we would die with dignity. We prayed together, the three of us kneeling before the small shrine in our unit. We recited the prayers I had learned as a child, the same prayers Ellen was learning now, words that had been spoken across the Imperium for 10,000 years by billions upon billions of faithful servants. The Emperor protects, the Emperor provides. The Voxcasters activated one final time, not with words but with a simple tone, a warning that pierced through every audio system on the planet simultaneously. The execution was beginning. 6 hours remaining. We spent them together on our sleeping pallet, Ellen between us, speaking quietly about nothing and everything. Mira told Ellen about her grandmother, who Ellen had never met, painting pictures with words of a life lived in service and faith. I told stories of my own childhood, of the simple pleasures of growing up on a peaceful world, conveniently omitting that this same peaceful world was about to burn. Ellen asked questions. Why did the Emperor need to burn the world? Could he not simply remove the bad people? Why did good people have to die with the corrupted? I had no answers that satisfied. The Imperium operated on scales beyond individual comprehension. The calculus that condemned Typhon Primaris involved factors I could not understand, strategic considerations that balanced individual lives against species survival. I told her this, trying to frame it in ways a 7-year-old could grasp, knowing I failed. 3 hours remaining. The temperature began to rise, subtle at first, barely noticeable. But our habitation unit's climate control struggled to compensate, the systems straining against external heat that should not exist. I checked the environmental sensors, seeing numbers climb beyond normal ranges. The bombardment had begun. Through our window, I could see the first impacts. Not in Hive Tertius, but in distant cities visible on the horizon. Massive explosions that bloomed like terrible flowers, fireballs rising kilometers into the atmosphere. Cyclonic torpedoes, each one carrying payload sufficient to destroy continents, falling in precisely calculated patterns to achieve total atmospheric ignition. The sky began to change color. The normal blue-white of Typhon's atmosphere shifted toward orange, then red. The bombardment was heating the air itself, bringing it to temperatures that would sustain combustion even without additional fuel. The firestorm was beginning. 2 hours remaining. The heat became oppressive despite our climate control. I could feel it radiating through the walls, through the floor. The residential stack shuddered with each distant impact, seismic shocks traveling through the planet's crust. Through the window, I watched the horizon ignite, entire landscapes consumed by flames that spread with impossible speed. People in the streets below looked up, seeing their doom approaching in the changing sky. Some ran, futile instinct overriding rational acceptance. Others stood transfixed, watching fire spread across the heavens. I saw cultists kneeling in worship, arms raised toward the burning sky as if greeting their alien gods. I saw families pressed together like ours, seeking comfort and embrace. Mira pulled Ellen close, covering her daughter's eyes even though there was nothing to be done. I wrapped my arms around them both, creating a circle of protection that was entirely symbolic and completely inadequate. 1 hour remaining. The temperature became unbearable. Our climate control failed entirely, the systems unable to compensate for external heat that now measured in the hundreds of degrees. The walls themselves felt hot to the touch. The air grew thick and difficult to breathe, each inhalation burning in my enhanced lungs. The sky outside our window was fully ablaze now, an ocean of flame that stretched from horizon to horizon. The clouds had ignited, burning away to reveal the void beyond. The very atmosphere was being consumed, transformed from life-sustaining blanket into killing inferno. I watched the residential stack across from ours simply collapse, the structural materials failing in the heat. Hundreds of souls dying in the rubble, crushed or burned, but at least dying before the full horror of the Exterminatus reached them. Perhaps that was mercy of a kind. 30 minutes remaining. Mira was screaming now, though I could barely hear her over the roar of wind and flame outside. The pressure was changing, our ears popping as the atmosphere itself was violently transformed. Ellen had gone silent, her small body rigid with terror that no words could soothe. I held them both, feeling their hearts beating against me, fragile and precious and doomed. I wanted to tell them I loved them, to offer some final comfort, but my throat was too dry, the heat too intense. We communicated through touch alone, 3 bodies pressed together against the end of everything. 15 minutes remaining. The window exploded inward, unable to withstand the external pressure and temperature. Superheated wind blasted through our habitation unit, carrying the smell of burning metal and flesh. The furniture ignited spontaneously. The walls began to glow, ceramic composites breaking down under temperatures they were never designed to endure. I tried to shield Mira and Ellen with my body, knowing it was useless but needing to do something, anything, to protect them. The heat was everywhere, inside and outside, cooking us from within as our blood began to boil in our veins. 5 minutes remaining. The building was collapsing around us. I could hear the structure failing, support columns buckling, floors pancaking down upon each other. Perhaps that was the mercy the Emperor provided, quick death by trauma rather than slow death by fire. Mira's grip on my hand went slack. I looked down and saw her eyes staring at nothing, her body already dead from the heat and pressure. I wanted to weep, but had no moisture left for tears. Ellen was unconscious in my arms, her small chest no longer rising with breath. They were gone. My family was gone, and I remained, my administratum enhanced physiology keeping me conscious seconds longer than theirs, allowing me to experience their deaths before my own. 2 minutes remaining. I do not remember the final moments clearly. The pain was absolute, consuming every sense and thought. I remember the ceiling collapsing, massive chunks of burning debris falling toward me. I remember trying to hold Mira and Ellen close even as my hands blistered and charred. I remember praying, screaming prayers to an emperor who had ordained this horror. Then darkness. Not the peaceful darkness of sleep, but the violent darkness of consciousness torn away. Death should have claimed me there, crushed beneath a collapsing hive while my world burned around me. Death should have claimed me. But death is not always merciful. Sometimes it takes its time. Sometimes it leaves you breathing in the ruins, trapped in the moment between living and dying, suspended in the space between existence and oblivion. I woke to silence, absolute and terrible silence. No wind, no fire, no screaming, just silence that pressed against my ears like physical weight. I could not see. Either I was blind or surrounded by complete darkness. I tried to move and felt resistance, my body pinned beneath debris. Pain flared through every nerve, indicating that somehow, impossibly, I remained alive. How long had passed? Hours, days. I had no reference point, no way to measure time in the absolute void. I attempted to take stock of my situation through touch alone. I was buried beneath rubble in what felt like a small void, protected by a chance configuration of collapsed structural elements. The air was hot but breathable, though each breath burned my damaged lungs. My left arm was trapped beneath something heavy. My legs were free but pinned at an angle that prevented movement. Slowly, agonizingly, I processed what had happened. The building had collapsed during the Exterminatus, and I had fallen into some sub-level structure that had survived the initial bombardment. Perhaps an old Mechanicus vault, built to standards that exceeded normal residential construction. The debris above had sealed me in, protecting me from the worst of the heat and atmospheric ignition. I had survived. Somehow, through impossible chance, I had survived. Mira and Ellen were dead. I knew this with certainty, even in the darkness. I had felt them die in my arms. Their bodies were somewhere in the rubble around me, reduced to ash and bone by heat that should have killed me as well. Why had I survived? What cruel design allowed me to endure when everyone I loved had perished? The Emperor protects, the creed proclaimed. But this was not protection. This was torture. This was damnation. I do not know how long I lay there in the darkness. Days, certainly. Perhaps weeks. Time became meaningless in the void. I slipped in and out of consciousness, my enhanced physiology keeping me alive despite injuries that should have been fatal. My body rationed its resources with biological efficiency, slowing my metabolism to conserve energy in the absence of food or water. Madness crept in during the periods of wakefulness. Hallucinations born of trauma and sensory deprivation. I heard Mira calling my name. I felt Ellen's hand in mine. I saw light where there was only darkness, my damaged brain conjuring false signals to fill the void. I prayed. Endless prayers in the darkness, reciting every litany and devotion I had ever learned. Sometimes I prayed for death, begging the Emperor to release me from this torment. Sometimes I prayed for understanding, seeking meaning in my impossible survival. Sometimes I simply screamed prayers into the void, rage and grief given voice in words of worship. The Emperor did not answer. He never does, I suppose. We pray and die and serve, and the universe continues its relentless progression toward heat, death, and entropy, indifferent to our small sufferings. Then, after an eternity in darkness, sound, mechanical, methodical, the sound of rubble being moved by equipment designed for salvage operations. Light began to penetrate the void, thin beams cutting through gaps in the debris above. I tried to call out, but my voice was gone, my throat too damaged to produce more than a rasp. I moved instead, shifting what debris I could, creating noise to alert whoever was above. The light grew stronger. Voices, distorted through vox grills. Not Typhon accents, but off-world authority. Inquisitorial salvage teams, sweeping the dead world for anything of value or intelligence. They found me 6 months after Typhon Primaris died. 6 months I had spent buried alive in the ashes of my world, sustained by blind biological function when my mind had long since surrendered to oblivion. They extracted me from the ruins like a piece of damaged equipment, their interest clinical rather than compassionate. I was an anomaly, a statistical impossibility, a survivor of Exterminatus. And in the Imperium, statistical impossibilities are never simply accepted. They are studied, questioned, and suspected until their existence can be explained or eliminated. I had survived the burning sky. But survival, I would learn, was merely the beginning of my punishment. The light was agony. After 6 months in absolute darkness, even the dim illumination of the salvage team's lumens felt like blades driven into my eyes. I screamed, or tried to, but my damaged vocal cords produced only a wet, rasping sound that barely registered as human. Hands in sealed environmental suits grabbed me, hauling me from the rubble with efficiency that suggested this was routine extraction procedure rather than the rescue of a living person. I was placed on a suspensor gurney, restraints securing my wasted limbs before I could even attempt movement. Through vision that swam with tears and damage, I saw the salvage team's leader lean over me, his helmet's faceplate reflecting my own face back at me. I did not recognize myself. The thing in the reflection was skeletal, skin burned and scarred, hair gone, eyes sunken deep into a skull that seemed too large for the wasted flesh that covered it. More corpse than man. More relic than human being. "Subject is alive," the team leader reported into his Vox unit, his tone suggesting this was unexpected and possibly unwelcome. Significant radiation exposure, severe malnutrition, third-degree burns across approximately 70% of body surface, multiple fractures. Recommend immediate quarantine protocols. And quarantine. The word penetrated my damaged consciousness with implications. I was too weak to fully process. I was not being rescued. I was being secured. They transported me through the ruins of what had been Hive Tertius. Through my pain and confusion, I caught glimpses of my world's corpse. The sky was a dead gray, choked with ash that fell like perpetual snow. The landscape was uniformly black, everything reduced to carbon and shadow. The hive structures still stood in places, skeletal frameworks of melted metal and shattered ceramic. But nothing lived. Nothing moved except the salvage teams in their sealed suits. Typhon Primaris was a tomb. 8 billion graves merged into one planetary monument to imperial necessity. The salvage shuttle was waiting in what had been Tertius Square, the same place where I had stood with my family and heard Inquisitor Lord Voke pronounce our death sentence. Now it was simply a flat expanse of fused glass, the heat of the Exterminatus having melted the pavement into a smooth obsidian mirror. I was loaded into the shuttle's medical bay, a sterile compartment designed for the transport of biological specimens rather than the care of patients. Automated systems attached themselves to my body, needles finding veins with mechanical precision, pumping fluids and medications into my ravaged system. The pain receded slightly, chemical mercy dulling the absolute agony to merely unbearable suffering. Through the medical bay's viewport, I watched Typhon Primaris recede as the shuttle achieved orbit. My world grew smaller, a blackened sphere against the void, all evidence of its former beauty erased. The wheat fields were ash, the hive cities were rubble, the 8 billion souls who had called it home were vapor and dust, and I remained. Kastor Venn, grain tithe administrator, 3rd class, husband to ash, father to vapor, the man who survived when survival should have been impossible. The shuttle docked with an inquisitorial vessel, a cruiser whose name I never learned, its hull black and unmarked by any chapter or fleet insignia. I was transferred to a medical facility that felt more like a detention center, placed in an isolation chamber whose walls were transparent plasteel reinforced with what I would later recognize as psychic shielding. The medicae who attended me wore full hazard suits, never touching me directly, operating through remote manipulators and servitor proxies. They treated my injuries with clinical efficiency, replacing fluids, treating burns, setting broken bones. But there was no warmth in their care, No acknowledgement that I was human rather than merely biological material requiring stabilization. I drifted in and out of consciousness for days, perhaps weeks. Time had lost meaning in the darkness beneath Typhon's ruins, and I could not re-establish its rhythm in this sterile limbo. When I was awake, I was subjected to examinations. Tissue samples extracted, blood drawn in quantities that seemed designed to exsanguinate me. Genetic sequencing performed while I watched my own DNA scroll across picked screens in patterns I could not comprehend. They were searching for contamination, for any trace of genestealer genetic material that might explain my survival. The Inquisition did not believe in miracles, only in explanations they had not yet uncovered. A survivor of Exterminatus was an impossibility that demanded investigation. When I was strong enough to speak, the interrogations began. Not gentle questioning, but intensive examination of every aspect of my life, conducted by inquisitorial staff trained to detect deception and heresy. They wanted to know everything. My family history going back 3 generations, my work assignments for the past decade, every colleague I had interacted with, every neighbor I had known, every moment of the cult uprising and Exterminatus. Had I noticed unusual behavior in my associates? When exactly had I first observed hybrid characteristics? Had I ever experienced unusual dreams or compulsions? Had I consumed food or water from sources that might have been contaminated? Had I engaged in any physical contact with known or suspected cult members? The questions continued for hours each session, asked and re-asked in different formulations, searching for inconsistencies that might indicate deception or corruption. I answered truthfully because I had no capacity left for lies, my mind too damaged by trauma to construct false narratives even if I had wanted to. But truth was not enough. Suspicion clung to me like radiation, invisible but pervasive. How had I survived when 8 billion others died? The question was repeated by every interrogator, every medicae, every inquisitorial acolyte who processed my case. The statistical impossibility of my existence demanded explanation. I told them about the Mechanicus vault, about the chance configuration of collapsed debris that had created a protected space. I described the building's construction, the sublevels that had been built to older, more robust standards before being incorporated into newer residential structures. I explained my administratum-enhanced physiology, the minor augmentations and treatments that allowed officials to function with slightly greater efficiency and endurance than baseline humans. They documented everything but believed nothing. Or rather, they believed I was telling the truth as I understood it, but suspected there were truths I did not know about myself, that I might be a sleeper agent, corrupted by genestealer genetic material but unaware of my own infection, that the cult had somehow arranged my survival for purposes I could not comprehend. 3 weeks after my recovery, I was transferred to a different facility, not on the inquisitorial cruiser but on a nearby world, Hadron Primus, a fortress moon that served as a regional inquisitorial headquarters. My isolation chamber was relocated to a secure wing where I encountered, for the first time, other survivors. There were 47 of us. 47 individuals recovered from Typhon Primaris's ashes, scattered across the dead world in pockets of impossible survival. We were kept separated initially, each in our own transparent cell, but we could see each other through the connecting corridors. I was not alone in my damnation. The woman in the cell adjacent to mine was named Lyra. She had survived in the deep underhive, protected by ancient mining tunnels that had been sealed and forgotten for centuries. The impact-triggered collapse had opened her escape route while simultaneously shielding her from the worst of the heat. She had spent 4 months alone in the darkness before salvage teams found her. Across the corridor was Davin, a PDF trooper who had been in an armored transport when the Exterminatus struck. The vehicle's hull, designed to protect against battlefield weapons, had provided just enough insulation to keep him alive as the world burned. He had emerged from the transport weeks later to find every other member of his regiment reduced to shadows burned onto walls. There was Hectus, a tech priest whose augmetic enhancements and emergency life support systems had sustained him in a collapsed Mechanicus shrine. Sister Morrigan, an ecclesiarchy hospitaller who had been in a deep vault conducting inventory when the sky ignited. Gren and Palla, a married couple who had survived together in a sealed water reclamation facility. Each survivor had a story of impossible chance, of being in exactly the right place with exactly the right protection to endure what should have been unsurvivable. We were statistical aberrations, anomalies in the Imperium's calculus of total planetary sterilization. The Inquisition did not know what to do with us. We were questioned endlessly, examined repeatedly, subjected to invasive procedures designed to detect any trace of Xenos corruption. Some survivors showed signs of radiation-induced mutation, cellular damage that could potentially be mistaken for gene-stealer genetic alteration. These individuals underwent additional scrutiny, their genetic material compared against extensive databases of known Xenos contamination patterns. 2 survivors were executed during my first month at the facility. Their screening had revealed ambiguous markers, genetic sequences that might have indicated early-stage genestealer infection, or might have been random mutations caused by radiation exposure. The Inquisition erred on the side of caution, which meant death. Better to kill 2 potentially innocent survivors than risk allowing a single infected individual to spread corruption. We were not told their names before execution. We simply woke one morning to find 2 cells empty, their contents removed and presumably incinerated. The message was clear. We existed on sufferance. Our lives extended only until such time as our contamination was confirmed or our usefulness expired. I underwent psychic examination by an inquisitorial interrogator, a psyker whose abilities allowed him to probe my memories and emotions directly. The experience was violating beyond description, my mind laid bare to alien scrutiny, every thought and feeling exposed and catalogued. He dug through my trauma, forcing me to relive Mira and Ellen's deaths in excruciating detail, while he analyzed my psychological responses for any sign of corruption or deception. When he was finished, I lay curled in my cell, weeping despite having believed I had no tears remaining. The interrogator filed his report, noting significant trauma consistent with legitimate grief, but no evidence of psychic taint or mental conditioning that might suggest cult influence. I was provisionally cleared of Xenos corruption. Provisionally. The Inquisition did not grant absolute certainties, only graduated levels of acceptable risk. I was low risk, but not no risk. Contaminated by proximity to Xenos even if not directly infected. Unreliable not through malice but through trauma that might make me vulnerable to future corruption. The other survivors underwent similar examinations. Some were cleared, some remained under suspicion. 3 more were executed when psychic probing revealed suppressed memories of contact with cult members or exposure to potentially contaminating materials. Whether they had actually been infected or simply been in the wrong places at the wrong times, I never knew. By the end of the 3rd month, 39 survivors remained. We were gathered in a common chamber, the first time we had been allowed to interact directly with each other. Inquisitor Lord Voke himself addressed us, his presence filling the room with the same cold authority I remembered from his declaration of Exterminatus. "You are cleared of direct Xenos contamination," he announced without preamble or comfort. "However, you remain classified as contaminated by Xenos proximity, a permanent designation that will follow you for the remainder of your lives." He paused, allowing the weight of that statement to settle. We were marked, branded by our survival. We would never be trusted again. The Imperium has no protocols for the reintegration of Exterminatus survivors into normal populations, Voke continued. You cannot return to your former lives or occupations. You cannot be permitted unrestricted movement through Imperial space. The risk of potential delayed contamination, while low, is not zero. I felt something die inside me. some last vestige of hope I had not realized I still carried. We had survived the burning, but we would not be allowed to truly live. Therefore, Voke said, "You are hereby sentenced to permanent settlement on Penal World Vorgus, a mining colony established for individuals who cannot be executed but cannot be trusted in civilized imperial society. You will serve the Imperium through labor, extracting resources that will supply the subsector war effort. This is not punishment, but prudent risk management." Prudent risk management. Our lives reduced to bureaucratic terminology. We had committed no crimes, but we would die in a penal colony regardless, because our survival created administrative complications. "You will be transported to Vorgus within 1 standard week," Voke concluded. "I suggest you use this time to make peace with the Emperor and accept your continued service in whatever capacity you are deemed fit to provide." He departed without waiting for questions or objections. What could we say that would matter? We were alive because the Inquisition had not yet determined we should be dead. That was the only mercy we would receive. The week passed in a haze of resignation. We survivors spoke to each other now, sharing our stories, our trauma, our grief. We discovered that we all carried the same wound, the survivors' guilt that gnawed at us constantly. Why had we lived when billions died? What possible purpose justified our continued existence when our families, our friends, our entire world had been consumed? Lyra had lost 3 children in the burning. Davin had watched his entire regiment die while he cowered in an armored transport. Sister Morrigan spoke of the Hospitaller sisters she had served with for 20 years, all dead while she hid in a vault counting medical supplies. We were united in our survival and our shame. Some sought meaning in faith, arguing that the Emperor must have spared us for some purpose we could not yet understand. Others embraced nihilism, seeing our survival as random chance in an uncaring universe. I found myself somewhere between, unable to believe in divine purpose but equally unable to accept complete meaninglessness. The transport to Vorgus was a prison ship, its holds converted to accommodate human cargo rather than military equipment. We were loaded aboard with other undesirables, political dissidents and failed imperial servants, criminals whose crimes were not severe enough to warrant execution but too serious to allow freedom. As the ship translated into the warp, I stood at a viewport and watched real space tear open to reveal the psychic hellscape beyond. Somewhere in that roiling madness, they said, the Emperor maintained the Astronomicon, the psychic beacon that allowed humanity to navigate the immaterium, his eternal suffering that enabled the Imperium's existence. We had suffered for the Imperium. We had lost everything so that other worlds might be spared gene-stealer corruption. And our reward was exile to a penal mining world. Our lives spent extracting promethium from toxic seams while carrying the permanent stigma of having survived when we should have died. "The Emperor protects," the creed proclaimed. But I understood now what that protection truly meant. The Imperium would do anything to preserve itself, sacrifice anyone, burn any number of worlds. We were protected only insofar as we served the machine, and the moment we became liabilities rather than assets, we would be discarded or destroyed. I had survived Exterminatus. But the man I had been, Kastor Venn with his family and his normal life, was as dead as Typhon Primaris itself. What remained was merely a biological automaton, processing trauma and breathing out of stubborn physiological habit rather than any real desire to continue existing. The ship's navigator announced we would reach Vorgus in 14 days of real space-time. 14 days until we reached our new prison, our permanent exile. I returned to my assigned berth and lay in the darkness, remembering Mira's smile and Ellen's laugh, holding on to memories that grew fainter with each passing day, afraid that eventually I would forget them entirely and lose the last proof that they had ever existed. Vorgus revealed itself as the prison transport descended through perpetual twilight. The world existed in a state of permanent dusk, its orbit an axial tilt conspiring to prevent true day or night across most of its inhabited regions. The sky was a bruised purple-gray, clouds hanging low and heavy with industrial pollutants that turned precipitation into weak acid rain. From orbit, the planet appeared diseased, its surface mottled with mining operations that scarred the landscape like open wounds. The penal colony occupied the largest continent, a sprawling complex of habitation blocks and industrial facilities that stretched for hundreds of kilometers. Massive promethium refineries dominated the skyline, their towers belching flames and smoke that never ceased. The colony processed fuel for the subsector war effort, extracting toxic hydrocarbons from deep seams and refining them under conditions that would violate safety protocols on any civilized imperial world. But Vorgus was not civilized. It was a dumping ground for the Imperium's complications, a place where problematic individuals could be simultaneously punished and exploited. We were not prisoners in the traditional sense, not serving sentences with hope of eventual release. We were permanent residents, exiled to perpetual labor until death claimed us. The transport landed on a ferrocrete pad stained black with centuries of promethium residue. We were processed through intake facilities that felt more like cattle processing than human administration. Our few possessions were catalogued and stored. We were issued gray coveralls marked with our new designations. I was no longer Kastor Venn, grain tithe administrator. I was prisoner designate 7739, contaminated by Xenos proximity, assigned to extraction crew 12. The Vorgus authorities separated us Typhon survivors from the general prisoner population during initial processing. We were marked. Our records flagged with warnings about potential Xenos taint that required periodic screening and monitoring. The other prisoners learned quickly to avoid us, treating us as pariahs, even in a population of exiles and criminals. We were housed in Habitation Block Gamma, a massive structure that contained 5,000 inmates in cells designed for half that number. The blocks were segregated by contamination category. Xenos proximity survivors like us shared space with individuals who had been exposed to minor warp phenomena, failed cultist deprogramming subjects, and those who had survived demonic incursions with their sanity technically intact. My cell was 3 meters square, containing a sleeping pallet, a waste reclamation unit, and nothing else. The walls were bare ferrocrete, stained with residue from previous occupants. Through the narrow window, I could see the refinery towers burning against the twilight sky, their flames the only constant light in Vorgus's perpetual dusk. I had 12 cellmates among the Typhon survivors, scattered throughout Habitation Block Gamma. We found each other during the first meal period, gravitating together in the massive dining hall where 5,000 prisoners consumed nutritional paste dispensed from automated servitors. We sat together not out of affection but out of shared recognition, each of us marked by the same wound. Lyra looked worse than she had on the transport, her already thin frame made skeletal by the journey through the warp. The psychic turbulence had affected us all poorly, our trauma-damaged minds proving vulnerable to nightmares that bled through from the immaterium. She spoke little during that first meal, staring at her paste without eating until I reminded her that starvation would solve nothing. Davin had adapted better, his PDF training giving him mental frameworks for enduring hardship. He explained the colony's structure as he understood it from intake briefings. We would work 12-hour shifts in the promethium extraction facilities. Production quotas were mandatory. Failure to meet quotas resulted in reduced rations. 3 consecutive quota failures resulted in transfer to the deep mines, where life expectancy measured in months rather than years. Sister Morrigan prayed constantly, her lips moving in silent devotions even as she ate. She had been a hospitaller, dedicated to healing and mercy. Now she was assigned to extraction work alongside murderers and heretics, her medical skills deemed irrelevant to her new purpose. The cognitive dissonance had broken something in her, leaving her clinging to faith as the only constant in a universe that had revealed itself as fundamentally hostile. We learned the rhythms of Vorgus quickly because survival demanded it. Wake at 0500 to a klaxon that cut through sleep like a blade. 30 minutes to perform ablutions and consume morning rations. Assembly in the extraction facility yard by 0600. 12 hours of labor extracting promethium from toxic seams that filled the air with fumes that bypassed standard respiratory filters. Return to habitation blocks by 1900. Evening rations. 2 hours of personal time before mandatory lights out at 2200. The work was brutal and monotonous. We descended into the extraction tunnels each day, equipped with basic mining tools and collection containers. The promethium seams ran deep beneath Vorgus's surface, requiring excavation through rock that released toxic gases when disturbed. We wore basic rebreather masks that filtered some but not all of the fumes, returning each day with lungs burning and eyes streaming. The quotas were calculated to require maximum effort without actually killing workers outright. A healthy, uninjured miner could meet quota with sustained labor and minimal breaks. An injured or sick worker would fail, triggering the reduction in rations that would make recovery nearly impossible. It was a system designed to extract maximum productivity before disposing of used-up assets. I met my quota every day through mechanical determination rather than any desire to excel. I swung my pick into the rock face because the alternative was starvation and eventual transfer to the deep mines. I filled my collection containers because my body demanded calories to continue functioning. I endured because surrender required an active choice I was too numb to make. The other Typhon survivors struggled more. Lyra barely met quota in her first week, her emaciated frame lacking the physical strength for sustained mining labor. Davin helped her when supervisors were not watching, sometimes filling her containers with his own excess production, sacrificing his safety margin to keep her alive. It was an act of compassion that seemed almost obscene in Vorgus's environment of institutionalized cruelty. 3 weeks into our sentence, we lost our first survivor. Hectus, the tech priest whose augmetics had saved him on Typhon Primaris, suffered a critical failure in his respiratory augmentation. The toxic fumes bypassed his mechanical filters, overwhelming his already damaged organic lungs. He collapsed in the tunnels and died before medical servitors could extract him to the surface. There was no ceremony. His body was processed for recyclable components, his augmetics reclaimed for the Mechanicus, his organic remains incinerated and used as fuel. Within a day, another prisoner had been assigned to his cell and his work quota. The colony's machinery did not pause for grief or remembrance. His death affected us deeply, though we struggled to articulate why. We had survived Exterminatus, witnessed billions die, lost our entire world. Yet Hectus's death in a promethium mine on a penal world struck us as uniquely tragic, a final insult added to incomprehensible injury. He had endured the burning sky only to die choking on toxic fumes in exile. His survival rendered meaningless by the Imperium's bureaucratic cruelty. Sister Morrigan led prayers for Hectus that evening in a corner of the dining hall where supervisors rarely patrolled. 7 of us gathered, the Typhon survivors who remained mobile and conscious enough to participate. She recited the liturgy for the faithful dead, words that had been spoken across the Imperium for 10 millennia, words that seemed hollow and inadequate. The Emperor receives all souls, she intoned. But what honor existed in Hectus's death? What peace awaited those who died forgotten on penal worlds, their names unrecorded, their sacrifices unacknowledged? The liturgy offered comfort through certainty. But that certainty felt increasingly like a lie we told ourselves to make existence bearable. Over the following months, we adapted to Vorgus's rhythms as one adapts to chronic pain, acknowledging its constant presence without achieving true acceptance. We learned which supervisors would overlook minor quota deficiencies and which would report failures without hesitation. We discovered which sections of the mines produced more accessible promethium, reducing the labor required to meet quota. We identified which prisoners could be trusted for minor assistance and which would report infractions in exchange for better rations. We became, in essence, part of the colony's ecosystem, fitting ourselves into niches that allowed survival without requiring hope or purpose beyond the next shift's completion. I encountered other Exterminatus survivors during this period, exiles from different worlds scattered across Vorgus's population. There was Krent from Solus Tertius, a hive world that had been virus-bombed to prevent orc spore contamination. Vessa from Kastor Prime, a shrine world consumed by warp storms that had required atmospheric incineration to close the rifts. Mordrin from Guest, purged by cyclonic torpedo when chaos cult penetration exceeded 40% of the population. Each carried the same mark we bore, the designation of contaminated by Xenos proximity, or its equivalent for warp exposure. Each had been pulled from the ashes of their dead world and exiled to Vorgus because the Imperium had no other protocol for processing statistical impossibilities. We recognized each other immediately, sharing the same haunted expressions, the same survivor's guilt, the same fundamental inability to understand why we continued breathing when our worlds had died. Krent organized irregular gatherings in unused sections of the habitation blocks, unofficial meetings where Exterminatus survivors could speak freely about their trauma without fear of judgment from those who could not comprehend our experiences. These gatherings violated no explicit regulations but existed in the gray spaces of colony administration, tolerated as long as we did not interfere with production quotas. During these meetings, we shared our stories. Not just the mechanics of survival, but the weight of memory, the burden of being the last voices from dead worlds. Vessa spoke of her shrine world's beauty, its cathedrals that had reached toward the sky in devotion to the Emperor, all reduced to molten slag. Mordrin described his son, 7 years old like my Ellen, who had asked why the sky was turning red before the flames consumed him. We were archivists of extinction, carrying within us the only remaining records of billions of lives that the Imperium had officially erased. Typhon Primaris existed in Imperial databases only as a notation. Exterminatus declared, Imperial Year 94, 1M41, Genestealer Cult Infestation. Total sterilization achieved. 8 billion souls, reduced to 3 lines of text. I began to document our stories, using scraps of parchment stolen from administrative offices and writing implements improvised from mining equipment. I recorded what Lyra told me about her children, their names and personalities and small habits that made them individuals rather than statistics. I preserved Davon's account of his regiment, the young troopers who had died in the cult uprising. I wrote down everything Sister Morrigan remembered about her Hospitaller sisters, their dedication and compassion and faith. The work became purpose. The first genuine purpose I had found since awakening in Typhon's ruins. I was not extracting promethium for the Imperium's war machine. I was preserving memory against the Imperium's institutional erasure. Small resistance, perhaps meaningless in the vast calculus of galactic history, but mine. Others joined the effort. Krent documented Solus Tertius, describing its hive cities and manufacturing centers with the precision of an engineer who had once designed industrial systems. Vessa recorded the liturgies and devotional practices unique to Kastor Prime, faiths that had evolved over millennia and died in a single day of atmospheric burning. Mordrin drew maps from memory, preserving the geography of a world that no longer existed in any form except his recollection. We created archives from scraps and memory, hidden in unused maintenance tunnels and forgotten storage chambers. The colony authorities would have confiscated or destroyed our work if discovered, but they paid little attention to what prisoners did during personal hours, as long as quotas were met and no violence erupted. The years passed in this manner, measured in shifts and quotas rather than seasons or celebrations. Vorgus had no seasons, its perpetual twilight unchanging. The colony marked time only through production reports and prisoner mortality statistics. We existed in a temporal limbo, neither truly alive nor permitted to die. I watched Lyra age prematurely. the toxic fumes and harsh labor wearing her body down faster than chronology alone could account. Her face grew lined, her movements stiff with accumulated injuries that the colony's minimal medical care could not properly address. She met quota through sheer determination, surviving week by week through willpower that should have failed years earlier. Davin maintained his physical strength better, his PDF conditioning serving him well in Vorgas's environment. But I watched the light fade from his eyes, the vital spark that made him human rather than merely biological machine slowly extinguishing. He performed his labor with mechanical efficiency, met his quotas without complaint, and spoke less with each passing year until he communicated primarily through nods and gestures. Sister Morrigan's faith sustained her longer than any of us expected, but even that eventually faltered. I found her one evening in her cell, staring at her hands with an expression of profound confusion. "I have forgotten how to pray," she said quietly. "The words are still there, but they mean nothing. They are sounds without substance. How does one continue when even faith fails?" I had no answer. My own faith had died on Typhon Primaris, burned away with my family and world. I had maintained the external forms of devotion because the alternative was admitting that we served an imperium that viewed us as expendable components in an eternal war machine. But the substance behind those forms had evaporated, leaving only hollow ritual. New Exterminatus survivors arrived periodically, deposited on Vorgas by prison transports that brought fresh batches of the Imperium's unwanted complications. Each group carried their own stories of worlds burned and impossible survival. We welcomed them into our informal community, taught them Vorgas's rhythms, and helped them understand that survival here required abandoning hope of anything beyond continued existence. A woman named Sorella arrived from Quintus Meridian, an agricultural world like Typhon Primaris, consumed by tyrannid infestation and subjected to viral bombardment. She had survived in a sealed granary facility, protected by layers of grain that had absorbed the initial viral payload and provided sustenance during the months before rescue. She wept when I told her about our documentation project, grateful that someone understood the importance of preserving what had been lost. A man called Thren came from Varsavia, an industrial world destroyed by weaponized nanotechnology that had gotten loose from a Mechanicus research facility. The Imperium had responded with atmospheric incineration, burning the nanite plague along with the planet's 12 billion inhabitants. Thren had been in a deep-core mining facility when the burning occurred, protected by kilometers of rock and ancient void shields never designed for that purpose. Each survivor added their voice to our archives, their memories to our collective preservation effort. We became a community bound, not by affection, but by shared recognition that we were the memory of the forgotten, the last witnesses to worlds the Imperium had deemed necessary to destroy. By my 5th year on Vorgas, I had documented 73 different dead worlds through the accounts of their survivors: Typhon Primaris, Solus Tertius, Carcadan Prime, Guest, Quintus, Meridian, Varsavia. Dozens of others, each reduced to notation in imperial databases, each carried forward only in the traumatized memories of those who had survived the unsurvivable. The archives grew to fill 3 hidden chambers in the maintenance tunnels beneath Habitation Block Gamma. Thousands of pages of testimony, drawings, and documentation. The collective memory of billions of lives, preserved by dozens of broken people on a penal world where we had been exiled for the crime of surviving. I knew the archives would likely be destroyed eventually, discovered during some routine inspection, or betrayed by a prisoner seeking favor with authorities. But that did not diminish their importance. For years, perhaps decades if we were fortunate, these records would exist as testament that the dead worlds had been more than strategic losses, that their populations had been more than acceptable casualties in the Imperium's eternal war. We remembered, we documented, we preserved. It was the only rebellion available to us, the only way to resist the Imperium's institutional erasure of everything we had lost. Small acts of defiance that would change nothing but mattered nonetheless because they were all we had. The work gave me purpose where none had existed before. I was still prisoner designate 7739, still condemned to perpetual exile, still scarred by radiation and trauma. But I was also Kastor Venn, keeper of memory for Typhon Primaris and the other dead worlds. My family was gone. My world was ash. But through documentation, I kept them alive in some small way, preventing their complete erasure from history. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And something was more than I had possessed when I first arrived on Vorgus, broken and hollow, existing without reason or purpose, beyond blind biological continuation. The Emperor protects, the creed proclaimed. But we protected each other, we survivors, through the simple act of bearing witness to each other's losses and refusing to let those losses be forgotten completely. The turning point came in my 7th year on Vorgas, when the prison transport deposited a new batch of survivors from Calth Secundus. 17 souls pulled from the ashes of an orc-infested hive world that had required cyclonic bombardment to prevent spore contamination from spreading to neighboring systems. They arrived broken in ways I recognized immediately. The 1,000-meter stare, the mechanical movements of people operating on autopilot, the complete absence of hope or purpose beyond the next breath. They had survived their world's burning mere months ago, the trauma still raw and unprocessed. I watched them during intake processing, seeing myself 7 years earlier, lost, confused, unable to comprehend how they had continued breathing when everyone they knew had been vaporized. The colony authorities processed them with the same clinical efficiency they applied to all new arrivals, assigning cells and work details without acknowledgement of their recent trauma. During the first evening meal period, I approached them, not as representative of any official group, but simply as someone who understood what they faced. I sat beside a young woman who stared at her nutritional paste without seeing it, her hands trembling slightly as memories played behind her eyes. "You are from Calth Secundus," I said quietly. She looked up, startled that anyone would address her directly. "I have been doing this long enough to recognize the recently arrived. My name is Kastor. I survived Exterminatus on Typhon Primaris 7 years ago." Her expression shifted from confusion to recognition. She had found someone who understood, who had experienced the same impossible survival and carried the same wound. "Mera," she managed. "I was a medikey in Hive Primus. I survived in a hospital sub-basement when the bombardment began. Over the following days, I helped Mera and the other Calth survivors understand Vorgus's rhythms. I taught them how to meet quotas without destroying themselves. I showed them which supervisors might overlook small failures and which would report infractions without mercy. I gave them the practical knowledge they needed to survive their exile. But more importantly, I listened to their stories. Mera told me about her patients, the people she had tried to save as the cult uprising overwhelmed the hive. She described her hospital's pediatric ward, the children she had cared for who died when the sky burned. She wept as she spoke, grief pouring out in words that had been dammed behind shock and trauma. I documented everything she said, preserving her testimony alongside the accounts from 73 other dead worlds. Then I showed her the archives, 3 chambers filled with the collective memory of billions of lost lives. "Why?" she asked, overwhelmed by the scope of what we had preserved. "Why go to this effort? The Imperium does not care. These worlds are forgotten officially. Our documentation changes nothing." "Because we remember," I replied. "Because someone must bear witness to what was lost. The Imperium reduces our worlds to strategic calculations, acceptable losses in eternal war. But we know they were more than that. We carry the truth that individual lives mattered, that the billions who died were not merely statistics, but people with names and stories and meaning." Mera stared at the archives, at thousands of pages of testimony written in cramped script on stolen parchment. Slowly, understanding dawned in her expression. "You are giving them immortality. not in the Emperor's light, but in memory. I am trying. We are trying. All of us who survived the unsurvivable. She joined our documentation efforts immediately, recording everything she could recall about Calth Secundus. The other survivors from her world followed, each adding their voice to our collective preservation project. Our community grew, binding us together, not through affection, but through shared purpose. I realized then what I had become. Not simply an Exterminatus survivor or prisoner designate 7739, but something else entirely. A guardian of memory for worlds that no longer existed. A keeper of stories for the billions who would otherwise be erased completely from history. The work consumed me, giving shape to existence that had been formless for years. I interviewed every new Exterminatus survivor who arrived on Vorgas, documenting their testimonies with precision that would have served me well in my former life as an administratum official. I organized the archives, creating systems for cataloging and cross-referencing that allowed efficient retrieval of specific accounts. Lyra contributed despite her declining health, recording oral histories from survivors too broken to write their own accounts. Davin created maps and diagrams, preserving geographical and architectural details that might otherwise be lost. Sister Morrigan, having abandoned formal prayer, found new purpose in transcribing testimonies with calligraphic precision that honored the dead through beautiful preservation of their stories. We had survived so that we could remember. Not for ourselves, but for those who could not. Our trauma had been transformed into duty, our grief into purpose. We would die on Vorgas eventually, our bodies consumed by toxic fumes and harsh labor. But before that death claimed us, we would ensure that the dead worlds lived on in some form, preserved against the Imperium's institutional erasure. It was not redemption. Our worlds remained dead, our families still vapor and ash. But it was meaning constructed from meaninglessness, purpose salvaged from purposeless survival. We had been sentenced to exile for the crime of impossible survival. We responded by becoming witnesses, archivists, guardians of memory for billions who would otherwise be completely forgotten. The Emperor protects, the creed proclaimed. But we protected the memory of those the Emperor had burned. Small, rebellion. Quiet, defiance. The only resistance available to powerless exiles on a penal world at the edge of Imperial space. And it was enough. Not sufficient to heal our wounds or restore what had been lost, but enough to make continued existence meaningful rather than merely mechanical. Enough to transform us from victims into guardians. Enough to matter. The news reached Vorgas through official Imperial channels, announced with the clinical detachment I had learned to expect from institutions that measured lives in acceptable loss ratios. Another world, declared Exterminatus. Calth Secundus, the same world Mera and the 16 others had escaped 7 years earlier, was burning again. No, not again. I misunderstood initially, my trauma-damaged mind struggling to process the information correctly. Not Calth Secundus, but Hadrian's world, a manufacturing center 3 systems away. The Inquisition had declared it perdita due to chaos cult penetration exceeding acceptable thresholds. Atmospheric incineration would commence within 72 hours. I stood in the habitation block common area, listening to the Vox broadcast with growing horror that I thought I had exhausted years ago. But fresh horror found me nonetheless, rekindled by the realization that this was not an isolated tragedy but a pattern, a cycle that repeated endlessly across the Imperium with industrial regularity. Hadrian's world. Population: 4,300,000,000. Primary production: military vehicles and armored components for the Astra Militarum. Strategic value: moderate. Cult penetration: estimated 37%. Inquisitorial assessment: unsalvageable through conventional means. Recommendation: total sterilization. The numbers were presented as if they explained everything, justified everything. 4 billion lives reduced to data points in a calculus that found them expendable. The same mathematics that had condemned Typhon Primaris, Calth Secundus, Solus Tertius, and the 73 other worlds documented in our hidden archives. Mera found me an hour later, her face pale with recognition. She had heard the broadcast. She understood what it meant, what it always meant. "How many?" she asked quietly. "How many worlds has the Imperium burned?" I had researched this question during my years documenting survivor testimonies, accessing what limited historical databases the colony's administratum maintained. Since the Horus heresy ended in the early 31st millennium, Imperial records acknowledge approximately 947 worlds subjected to Exterminatus protocols. The actual number is likely higher, as not all such actions are recorded in accessible archives. 947 worlds. The number was incomprehensible, too vast to truly process. Each world represented billions of lives, cultures spanning millennia, histories and achievements and simple human moments, all erased in fire and virus and cyclonic bombardment. "And we continue," Mera said, not quite a question. "The Imperium burns its own worlds and continues functioning as if this is normal, as if planetary genocide is simply another administrative procedure. Because it is," I replied, hearing the bitterness in my own voice. "We exist in an Imperium where Exterminatus is not an aberration but a tool, deployed whenever the calculus determines that a world's corruption exceeds its strategic value. The machinery that murdered our worlds is not broken. It is functioning exactly as designed." We stood together in silence, processing the implications. Somewhere, 4 billion people were experiencing the same terror we had known. Parents were holding children and trying to explain the unexplainable. Families were making final choices about how to spend their last hours. The innocent and guilty alike were being sentenced to annihilation for the crime of existing on a world that had been deemed expendable. And there was nothing we could do. No warning we could send. No intervention we could mount. We were exiles on a penal world, our voices silenced by distance and institutional indifference. We could only wait and know that in 72 hours, another world would join the roster of the dead, and eventually survivors would arrive on Vorgus to be added to our archives. The waiting was its own torture. I found myself checking chronometers obsessively, tracking the hours until Hadrian's world would burn. 72 hours became 60, became 48, became 24. Each passing hour brought 4 billion souls closer to annihilation, and I could only witness from across the void, helpless and complicit by virtue of my silence. When the execution window arrived, I gathered with other Exterminatus survivors in one of our archive chambers. We had no way of observing the actual bombardment, no Vox feeds or picked captures to document Hadrian's world's death. But we knew the schedule. We knew the procedures. We had all experienced what those 4 billion people were experiencing in their final moments. We prayed. Not to the Emperor, whose inquisition had ordered the burning, but to the memory of the dead. We spoke the names of our own lost worlds, our lost families, adding Hadrian's world to the litany, even though we knew nothing of its people or culture. We bore witness in the only way available to us, acknowledging that billions were dying and their deaths mattered, regardless of what the Imperium's calculus determined. Sister Morrigan, who had abandoned formal prayer years ago, found words that captured what we all felt. They are not acceptable losses. They are not strategic necessities. They are people, human beings with the same rights to existence as any of us. And they are being murdered by the Imperium that claims to protect humanity. Heresy. By any technical definition, speaking such words could result in execution if reported. But we were already exiled, already marked as contaminated and untrustworthy. What further punishment could silence bring that we did not already endure? The moment passed. Hadrian's world died, though we would not receive official confirmation for days. Somewhere in the void, cyclonic torpedoes or atmospheric incinerators or virus bombs were transforming a living world into a sterile monument to imperial pragmatism. 4 billion souls were joining the countless trillions who had died the same way across 10,000 years of eternal war. And the Imperium continued. Fleets moved to their next objectives. Administrative officials filed the appropriate documentation. Inquisitors assessed the next potential threat. The machinery of galactic governance ground forward without pause or reflection, consuming worlds and populations as fuel for its perpetual operation. I returned to my cell that night and added a new page to our archives. Hadrian's World, declared Exterminatus, Imperial Year 955 M41, Chaos Cult Infestation, Population 4,300,000,000, awaiting survivor testimonies. The page joined thousands of others, testament to a pattern I finally understood completely. Exterminatus was not an emergency measure or last resort. It was policy, applied routinely whenever worlds became more problematic than valuable. The Imperium that claimed to protect humanity was also its most efficient killer, burning its own populations with industrial regularity to prevent contamination from spreading. We survivors existed as proof of this horror. We had endured the unsurvivable and been exiled because our existence created uncomfortable questions about the necessity and frequency of planetary annihilation. Better to hide us on penal worlds than allow our testimonies to circulate among populations that might begin questioning imperial methods. But we would not be silenced completely. Our archives grew with each new survivor, each new testimony, each new dead world added to the roster. We documented what the Imperium wanted forgotten. We preserved what was meant to be erased. We remembered when the institution demanded that we forget and move forward to the next acceptable loss. More survivors would come from Hadrian's World eventually. Perhaps dozens, perhaps only a handful. We would welcome them, teach them Vorgus's rhythms, and help them understand that their trauma had meaning beyond personal suffering. They would add their voices to our archives, their memories to our collective preservation effort. The cycle would continue. Worlds would burn. Survivors would arrive. We would document and preserve and bear witness. Small resistance against an Imperium that functioned on planetary genocide as routine policy. I understood my purpose now with absolute clarity. I had survived Exterminatus not by divine intervention or random chance alone, but so that I could serve as guardian of memory for those who could not. My family was dead. My world was ash. But through documentation and preservation, I ensured they were not erased completely, that their lives and deaths retained meaning beyond strategic calculations. The Emperor protects, the creed proclaimed. But the Emperor also burns. And we, the survivors, existed in the space between those truths, carrying witness to the horror while the Imperium marched forward into its endless war, leaving trails of dead worlds in its wake. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was everything I had, and I would continue until death finally claimed me, adding my own testimony to the archives so that future survivors might understand they were not alone in their grief and purpose. I am Kastor Venn, and I carry Typhon Primaris within me. Every wheat field, every laughing child, every faithful servant who believed the Emperor's protection meant preservation rather than annihilation. 8 billion souls reduced to ash, and I remain to speak their names. The archives beneath Vorgus now document 112 dead worlds, each page written in stolen moments between shifts, each testimony preserved against institutional erasure. We are 43 survivors here, guardians of memory for populations that measured in the hundreds of billions. More worlds will burn. The Imperium's calculus is immutable. Contamination will exceed acceptable thresholds. Inquisitors will pronounce judgment. Cyclonic torpedoes will fall. and survivors will arrive here, broken and questioning, seeking meaning in meaningless survival. We will welcome them. We will document their stories. We will ensure the dead are not forgotten completely, even if we die in exile on this twilight world. This is what it means to survive Exterminatus. Not merely breathing after your world dies, but carrying that death within you always, transforming trauma into duty, grief into preservation. The burning sky never truly ends. It lives in us, in our memories, in our testimonies. We are the unwanted witnesses, the inconvenient survivors, the guardians of billions, who exist now only in our archives and our remembering, and we will not be silent.